chief. Oh, that's right. Who's a big baby snake?
Yeah, me. I'm the diaper chief, not him. Colonel, I'm scared.
What are you scared for, Snake? Watch the pee-pee poo-poo man over the...
It's all over. Hey everyone, welcome to a little discussion video. I've done this kind of stuff before, but I don't know if I've done something like this for 2 full TV shows. But I want to talk about Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul. This is being recorded 1 day after the finale of Better Call Saul. It's an episode called Saul Gone, which, I mean, thanks Vince. Bravo Vince, as they say. It's a really good episode. I want to talk about that maybe first. However, just a little bit of an introduction for those that don't know. I watched Breaking Bad this year for the first time. And after the first couple episodes, I was hooked. I had never seen it because I didn't have Netflix for a long time. And I also was not interested in meth. So the show's concept didn't appeal to me when it first aired, but I had friends telling me, Vin, you gotta watch Breaking Bad forever. So eventually, which is way too long after it aired, I watched it, and I loved it, and I said it was maybe one of the best shows I've ever seen. Then, Better Call Saul, I watched, and the first season didn't grab me because the show was too tonally different after all the crazy stuff that happened in Breaking Bad's finale. And then I kind of got into it, loved Michael McKean, loved Bob Odenkirk, obviously. Then Ray Seahorn as Kim really started winning me over. Obviously Mike Finger, I believe is his name. And it turned into its own thing with its own pace. Maybe in some ways surpassing Breaking Bad. Definitely more subtle in its presentation because it didn't have the amount of explosions, for one, Breaking Bad did. But it kind of got there. I mean, the cartel stuff, for sure, contributed. But just for the record, before I begin my Saul Gone episode discussion, I would say that Better Call Saul is equal to Breaking Bad. Now that I've seen all of it. I loved it, and I'm glad I got a chance to watch it live as it was airing the final season, because I really enjoyed it up until the final season, and then I enjoyed it more. So it was a great show, and I will miss it. And as promised, this is my video discussing both shows. I don't know how in-depth I'm going to go. I don't have any notes. So this is all off the top of my head, but here's what I'll say about the final episode. Obviously spoilers for everything related to Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul. Let's start with the new finale that aired yesterday. I thought it was really well done. The way I described it to Liam and King K, we watched, I don't know how it happened, but we ended up watching the episodes as they aired, is this. I described it as Ganon's castle. It felt like the final dungeon of a Zelda game because we got a little bit of every show. We got a little bit of early season Saul with him and Chuck, which I found out was actually before the first episode. We've got mid-season with a return to Bagman, that's how it opens. We even got a little flashback to Breaking Bad with Walter. No, I'm sorry. Yeah, with Walter and with Saul. And that was all really well done. The theme of the time machine and regret. I thought each scene added something and also gave you a really deep insight into like the core values of each of these important characters. I'm glad we got to see Mike. And then, of course, it all starts to kind of coalesce into this show about here's this dude who he's got a persona. He's putting it on. It ends in the courtroom where he is at his best. And then some shit happens. He kind of reveals all about his crimes, and he finally reaches that level of self-awareness, of building his time machine, so to speak. And it was great. I thought it was really powerful, and it was well earned. The episode starts with Jimmy, aka Gene, aka Saul. Gene, in this case, running from the cops because Carol Burnett, Marianne, she discovered who he was. And I'm glad they didn't drag out a long chase scene. It was just enough, and then he's in a dumpster, much like the cardboard cutout from the first episode of the season. And he ends up losing his diamonds, and his downfall, of course, is the shitty plastic packaging on those cell phones that you need a pair of scissors for, like a Larry David skit. It was actually in Curb Your Enthusiasm, that exact thing. But of course, that's how he gets discovered. And he wanted that Hoover Max Extract Pro, but instead, yeah, he gets arrested real early in the episode, which was a surprise. We get a little bit more of Kim's stuff. By the time we're this far into the show, Kim is not making her own decisions. Kim is in a different life. She has a different haircut, which I assume is because she doesn't even want to look at herself. And she's using Miracle Whip, which is, I read online someone's take that Miracle Whip is an interesting parallel to like a fake thing based on the real thing, which is what her life has become. All I'll say is yep. And by this time, Kim had become one of my favorite characters. I think she's one of the best written women in TV and movies that I've seen, where they give her a full arc. She's realistic. Ray Seahorn's acting is very natural, but just she's so good in this role, and probably in many roles. But I think she shows you that you can be a complex, flawed person who's still confident, but then go through trauma, and this is how she ends up, and it's sad. So when they show her, going through her life in the previous episode, and then this one, it's kind of heartbreaking, but I think the way it ties in is really well done. Like, she definitely wanted to be in the law, and for her, working at this sprinkler place is just soul crushing. So I'm glad she found a way to get back to that. But yeah, Saul, we saw his transformation from Jimmy to Saul to Gene, and now finally he's kind of in a state of flux, and he decides that he's going to try to come out on top. And the lawyer, I forget who the name of the lawyer that he hires, his old friend, quote unquote, he has this really great plan to get his sentence super reduced until he hears about Kim having confessed to Howard's death, which, by the way, holy shit, that episode before the mid-season break blew my mind, because when you have a show that's kind of minimal like this in a way, and it's not crazy shit happening constantly, here's this character we watched this whole time who really was probably one of the best guys, one of the best people in the show, in the universe of Breaking Bad that we've seen. Because sure, he's kind of giving in to Chuck early on, but he just wants to do his job. And he does have a moral compass. And he even tried to give Jimmy a chance and make amends with him. But it was just too fun for Jimmy and Kim to not go the extra mile with him. Excuse me. And then suddenly the worlds collide with the cartel stuff with Lalo, the amazing Tony Dalton, and with Howard. And it really, it's shocking because you don't really expect that to happen, but it happens. And that changes everything. I mean, the hard cut from that, the aftermath of that event into just the Breaking Bad universe with Saul, it says all it needs to say. I think that is a really clever way of showing, here's a guy who is so emotionally broken, he is running from himself, he's running from responsibility, he's running from memories, and that's addressed in this final episode. Meanwhile, Kim leaves him and ends up starting a new life, which, as we know, is not the most exciting life. But she did the right thing. She admits what happened. And then Jimmy, when he hears about this, aka Gene in this timeline, he says, you know what? This cunning plan I had to solve my court case, it falls apart. And he decides that he's going to make Kim, you know, he's going to help her out with the case, and so that she doesn't get charged. Long story short, it was not the most bombastic of endings to a show, but to me it absolutely stuck the ending, and it had the exact emotional conclusion to these characters that I didn't know I wanted, but I'm so glad it happened. A couple things were a little on the nose, like at the trial, he's like, my name isn't Saul, my name is Jimmy. But that's fine, you can spell out a little bit for the audience. It worked because it made sense in the character motivation, and it also made sense in the plot. So I was okay with that. But I actually was wondering, is this another scheme? I didn't think Jimmy had it in him to sell Kim down the river for less sentence time. And it's clear that he wanted her there so she could see that he was going to lay it all on the line and basically put all this stuff out and say, hey, this is what I did. Sure, I didn't make the meth, but I enabled Walter White. My brother killed himself because I didn't do enough for him, and because then I tried to actively hurt him. And because of all this, an innocent person, Howard Hamlin, not only died, but had his reputation destroyed. That was a very satisfying scene for me. Sad to see Jimmy go to jail, but in this Breaking Bad universe, we don't really see a lot of characters in jail. He got justice, and that's what being a lawyer was about for him, well, at least in the early days. And then later it became, how can we make as much money, and how can we get as many clients, and how can we get Walter White to make a fuckload of money for me? That was, you know, that's one of his many sins. But I think by the end he does his penance, and it was a powerful scene. The acting was as good as Bob Odenkirk has delivered, if not his best in some ways. So I loved the finale. And then, you know, we see them at the end. Kim goes into the jail where he's at. It's very gratifying again to see her kind of become herself, which she's also maybe leaving some of the regret behind. Goes in there, leans against the wall, has a cigarette with Jimmy. Great cinematography the whole episode. In fact, the whole show, but especially, you know, just little shots that mirror what we've seen in the past. Down to the orange glow in the cigarette, just a little spark of something. And then, something that I picked up on, I didn't see a whole lot of this online, but I liked that the ending, maybe I'm reading into this a little bit too much. Leave a comment, for real, let me know what you think about this, but I liked at the end, we got the finger guns. So, at the end of the previous season, Kim gives the finger guns to Jimmy, and he's a little surprised by that. And as an audience, we're like, oh shit, Kim is kind of down to break bad a little bit, to do some of this stuff. We learn that she had kind of a fucked up childhood, and it makes sense. At the end of the show, at the end of the episode, we see Jimmy doing the finger guns back to Kim, and the way it's shot almost gave me somewhat of a, let's just say if she was smuggling something out of there, or if she was going to help him get out, the way it was filmed, in my mind, I kind of went there. It was almost somewhat ambiguous, like, are they hatching another scheme? You know, maybe, is it possible that Jimmy organized Kim to get there so that she could feel pity for him, so that she would then show up and help him? Maybe he knows a way she could help him. And then they talk about it over a cigarette, and they're launching a scheme to get him out of jail early. I don't know. I don't think that's the case, but the way it was shot at the end, there was both an emotional conclusion of like, hey, this is just what it is. I'm doing my time. There's the finger guns. You know, that's who I am. And then there's a part of me that felt like it was almost a little ambiguous, like, well, this is Jimmy, but maybe that side of him isn't totally gone. I could be completely reading into it wrong, but I liked that there was some level of ambiguity, and it helped me feel like, oh, there might be some debate at the end of the show. I haven't seen very much of it online, though, but that's okay. The thing is, even if that's not the case at all, it still worked completely for me as an emotional ending. You have these two characters that became so important for the show. Well, Ray Seahorn, Kim wasn't originally planned to be, I guess, the other, like, lead, but I think this is kind of the direction I wanted it to go in, was those two characters finding some way to reconcile at the end, but it was done in a way that it was a little unexpected. It paid off because, yeah, Jimmy needed to experience some kind of justice for his actions. He finally admits what he did that fucked people over, and then Kim kind of forgives him and has this moment of empathy for him that I got very emotional at the end of the show, and I'm glad it was done the way it was. So bravo Peter this time, because he directed and wrote the episode. Just a quick addition that I'm adding the next day, and bless Johnny for editing this in. But there's a couple thoughts I had for the end of Saul that I wanted to just express because I think they're important. Which is, one, I feel like Jimmy finally going to prison is not the worst thing that could have happened to him. I mean, he's still, baking something, and people respect him, and people kind of treat him like he's king shit. And I guess in some ways that works better than the dead, meaningless life of him just trying to pretend that he's this Gene guy, and the fear and the anxiety and the paranoia, and him just, rewatching old memories. Now, at least, he can be himself, and that version of himself is, Jimmy. It's not Saul. It's not Gene. Jimmy's got his issues, of course, but clearly he's demonstrated that he's capable of good, and he did what Walter White never could. And I like that contrast between the two characters. The scene with Kim, I really liked, and I mentioned earlier that the finger guns could be a little ambiguous about some kind of scheme, but the more I think about it, the less I feel that's true. In some ways, it's a parallel. He's behind a fence. What kind of scheme could they do? He's in prison. In a way, it maybe symbolizes that that's the end of Saul. And just a little message that he wanted to send to her. I think it's a really sweet moment. And the fact that, she will probably visit him more. So I think it's actually a really nice emotional tie-up to everything. And even if you do read into it differently, it's there. And also, the first phone call that Saul makes when he gets arrested is to Cinnabon. And it's like, hey, can you handle the rotation? By the way, I'm probably, we need a new manager probably real soon. So again, little things like that prove to me that Jimmy was a way better person. He just had a lot of shit that compounded the negative side of his personality. And maybe if he had that time machine, he could have gone back and changed one thing or another, or talked to his brother. Who knows? But I feel like justice was had. I may be repeating myself from my original discussion, but justice definitely has been done, and it's a bittersweet ending, but it ended up really affecting me. And I've been thinking about it, and I've been thinking about that cigarette they shared, and the images are sticking in my mind. This is now 2 days later. So I thought it was great. And I just wanted to mention a couple little things like that maybe I hadn't in the original version. So carry on, past Vinny. And thank you. But also all the little we got a scene with Mike who talked about his regret. And he was going to say the day his son died, but then he said, the day I took my first bribe. That was powerful for me because he is a character who realizes, like, hey, I could go back and erase this one thing that was terrible, or I could change the course of my life, because he became crooked at that time and it affected everyone around him and his own life. So I really liked Mike's answer. Of course, Jimmy didn't open up at that time. He just wanted money. Then finally, we get to see Walt. Bryan Cranston immediately just perfect. Sure, he's older, you can hear it a little bit, but he still looks and sounds the part, like, perfectly. Even better than Aaron Paul, who, let's be honest, he's a 40-something-year-old dude playing a 20-something-year-old. That's going to be hard for anyone to pull off, and I think he did really, really well, especially in that scene with Kim. But, yeah, Walter just comes up, he's just cranky and crotchety, and that's perfectly in character. And finally, maybe a little bit, Jimmy's opening up, and then he closes back down, Saul at this time. And then Walter just kind of treats him like shit. Just a cantankerous, egocentric asshole. And I'm so happy they did that instead of making him, like, precious to the audience. Like, no, this is who Walter White was. Perfect scene. Then we got to see Chuck. And his time machine was, that's the theme. But the idea being, like, what if Jimmy did talk to Chuck that night? What if they connected and that was a night that Chuck was willing to open up and, give Jimmy his attention and time finally? That said, though, in that scene, you can still see Chuck as a little adversarial, and it makes Jimmy question why even bother. But it was really great to see these central characters again, and oh man, just a really great episode, and sad, but also satisfying. And if this is the last we see of these characters, then I'm happy it went down like this. It enriches, for me, Better Call Saul enriches Breaking Bad, tells its own story, and this finale actually concluded both stories. We even got Marie, Hank's wife. We got a little bit of justice for Hank and Gomi. And I really enjoyed that because we didn't really get too much of that in Breaking Bad. They kind of semi-glossed over it a little bit. So here we finally got that closure too. I think these two shows together will go down as two of the best shows in TV history for many, many years to come. I hope that these writing lessons will be learned by other TV writers so we don't get more fucking complete just schlock. How do we get these characters to do cool things? Let the characters dictate where the plot goes. Make it feel natural. Write them like real people. And that will get the audience invested. And then you can have things happen around them. And it'll be interesting. So, sure, the show wasn't perfect. There's always going to be like a little bit of a thing here and there that didn't quite gel or some inconsistency. But for my money, these are two of the best pieces of written visual storytelling I've seen in my life. I don't say that hyperbolically. Maybe it's just because the finale is really new for Saul, and I thought they stuck the landing for sure. But having had months away from Breaking Bad, that show really, really won me over. So let me talk about Breaking Bad for a minute. So, obviously people were recommending the show. There were memes. Somehow I avoided it. And I said to myself, I want to watch a new show, but I don't know what to watch. Let me watch Breaking Bad. How could it be bad if everyone likes it? The pilot was immediately... I thought it was a good pilot. And not every show drags you into the world so effectively in the first episode. And, the show's tone changes a little bit, and it's still weirdly comedic throughout the whole run, but for a show like that ends up dealing with such heavy topics, you feel like the medicine goes down kind of easy, and I think part of it is Cranston's performance and some of the stuff around him, like Hank, obviously Jesse, and the show kind of immediately gripped me And then from the first episode, the momentum continued into the Crazy Eight thing. It continues into, well, here are the consequences of these actions. Stuff that you wouldn't see, like how do we get rid of this body? Oh fuck, Jesse fucked up. And it's like an episode. Really somewhat realistic ways of looking at what it would be like to do this stuff. To me, that sets the show apart. The concept of going from someone who's just a mild-mannered teacher, who's like kind of a nobody, who kind of, you know, kind of doesn't have a lot going on, to being one of the most like fucked up people who hurts a lot of people around him. I bought it completely. And that first season was good, and it only got better. The stuff with when John Delancey shows up in, I think that's season 2, and then the whole thing with his daughter, I forget her name at the moment, but Jesse, you know, falls for her, and oh god, how could I not remember her name? Breaking Bad girl, Jesse. Jane. I don't know how I forgot that. But the whole thing with Jane and Walter just kind of leaving her to choke on her own vomit. That was a very specific scene, but that I've heard interviews about. But by the time it gets there, shit gets really, really real. And then you really start to feel emotionally for these characters. But for me, the drug stuff is just not a topic I'm all that interested in. And I like sci-fi, I like fantasy, I like X-Files, which incidentally Vince Gilligan worked on and worked with Cranston in an episode, which is how he probably eventually got this job. But this show has its own little world, and season 2 expands it. You get Saul. I think Gus is also season 2, like an introduction. And every season just builds up onto this until you get to this. The stakes are so high, you know, and the breakfast for Flynn for Walt Jr. is always on the table. And that's why when we get to a certain point, you're just like, how is Walter getting so lucky? And the relationship between him and Jesse is deteriorating, and then it gets better, and then it deteriorates, and then the lies. And the lab, I like the Fly episode, by the way, just for the record. I thought it was a good way to see, it's a good bottle episode, and it was a good way to see their characters in just the most ridiculous situation possible. It was a pure Walt and Jesse chemistry episode, and I really liked that. But seeing the stakes just continue to rise, Skylar gets involved. And then little by little, how do they continue to evade Hank detecting who Walter White really is? You know, who Heisenberg really is, rather. And it ends up with him on the shitter. And then he finds out, and that was an amazing moment. Apparently people had to wait like a year between that and the next episode after that. So with Saul, we only had to wait like a couple months. But that ended up being one of those things where, oh, just one more episode. I got to see what happens. I was really invested in these characters. Also, great music throughout all of Breaking Bad. Some songs that I loved and knew already, some I hadn't discovered yet, but really good soundtracks, really great direction. I love the shots where it starts on an object, it's mundane, it follows, the camera tracks along, and then you get another thing, another thing, and then another thing, and then it kind of pulls up, and then, you know, you get more of the picture. Sometimes you don't know what happened until the end of the season, like the plane. Other times, the end of the episode, and sometimes right then and there. And this is the thing they brought over to Saul too. But the whole show there really wasn't a bad episode as far as I'm concerned. It only gets better, but I also thought Breaking Bad stuck the ending. Watching Walter White, I mean, it definitely had a couple moments where it wasn't too realistic, like the machine gun and Felina, the final episode. But the way he deals with things is very Walter White. The way he deals with Hank. The whole plot with the cartel and Walter that was the tense stuff. That was the action-y stuff. And Gus is one of the best. I love Giancarlo Esposito. I think he's fantastic, and he killed it in both series, but especially Breaking Bad. It's a little cartoony, like the CG on him becoming Two-Face, but it didn't really matter too much because it was so earned. And yeah, I mean, you can go into, like, again, I watched the show very quickly over the course of like a month or two, and that was several months ago. So I'm not going to do like a video essay on Breaking Bad right now because I don't have that wealth of information. I've only seen the show once. But while it's still somewhat fresh in the mind, I can tell you that there are a lot of little things that I would imagine you can go back, rewatch the show, and pick up on. And that whole subplot about Hector, especially enriched by Saul, but his chemistry and his, not chemistry, but like his connection to Gus and how it ends for both of them is just phenomenal. And the fact that Walter is just this bulldozer that comes in and just wrecks people's lives, and his whole, like, he did this to himself. And he, even in the final episode of Saul, he talks about this tech company, Gray Matter. And the truth is, you know, the invitation was extended. He could have gone back and worked for Gray Matter. You know, he could have ended up contributing to science and making a bunch of money. He just had too much goddamn pride. And that was the poison, among other things, but that was the poison that made Walter White. All these little things, and lots of symbolism, obviously foreshadowing, lots of setup and payoff, and lots of really natural writing that it was incredibly well acted. All of it together made Breaking Bad just a joy to watch, but also very fucking tense. And there were times I wanted to, like, leave the room. So, yeah. And then, again, you get to the end, and Walter doesn't redeem himself, really. I mean, a little bit. Fuck Todd, by the way. Holy shit. Meth Damon, really. What an effective way to make a villain just loathsome. But, yeah, the fact that the final episode had this machine gun plot was a little weird, but I thought it ended well. I thought Felina stuck the landing as well. Even if a couple little moments didn't fully work for me, it's a hard thing to do, is wrap up all that. And then they did. And he kind of, you know, he shows up in his old house, talks to Skylar. He was good at it. He liked what he did. Hearing him admit that was very satisfying. And then him saving Jesse was very selfless of him. And I'm glad that he ended as not sympathetic necessarily, because you know what? You do root for him almost the whole way through until he does some pretty nasty shit, like with Mike. But you do root for the guy because you feel bad for him, and they set it up in such a way that you can understand his decisions a little bit, especially with his cancer treatment and how fucking much money it was going to cost him and bankrupt his family. He should have taken the deal from, I think his friend's name was Elliot. He really should have just swallowed his pride. That would have been a drop in the bucket for Elliot. But that's the problem. And it kind of, I know Vince Gilligan didn't want it to be an overt political thing. I've listened to interviews with him about, like, the American healthcare system and about, like, you know, men and menergy. But the truth is, there's, you know, guys can sometimes be told, put your feelings aside and just suck it up and be tough. And, you know, a lot of times men are ignored and treated like a joke. I really believe that. The problem is that doesn't excuse the behavior. Walter White is a clear example of someone that ended up becoming a time bomb and hurting so many people because of that pride. And if he had just accepted the offer, it would have been fine. I do think Vince was trying to make a statement a little bit about that kind of thing. And I do think that you can have a little sympathy keeping those things I said in mind, but that doesn't change how awful he became. like poisoning that kid, like not rolling Jane over. Even though that's a tough choice, and to this day my friends debate that one. Did he directly kill her or not? And would that have eventually killed Jesse because of the drug use? So that's what's great about the show, is there's a lot of debate. But anyway, by the end of it, Walter is pretty reprehensible at this point, but at least it ends satisfying enough that he gets to save Jesse and do something. And, you know, him and Saul, who, by the way, was much more of a comedic character in Breaking Bad, have to, earlier in the final season of Breaking Bad, they have to use the Robert Forster vacuum services to leave. And all that stuff is very interesting, just seeing how it was shot and done. And I think it's handled really well. And then the show ends. Okay, so the show ends. And then apparently Vince Gilligan announces we're going to do a prequel about Saul Goodman. And people were like skeptical or just straight up pissed. Because how could you take this comedic, like this dude is the most unrealistic character in the show. And then it starts, Better Call Saul starts with Jimmy McGill, not Saul Goodman, and his weird brother who has electrosensitivity or something. And the tone is different, and there's a court case, and it just feels like a different thing, and it's like, God damn it. Watching it so soon after Breaking Bad, like a week after, or the same week, I'll admit I was on my phone more than I wasn't. That's not true. I was on my phone more than I was for Breaking Bad, because the first couple episodes of Saul just were too slow, and even though they had, what's his name, Salamanca, show up, it didn't win me over yet. But when we started getting into the stuff with him and Chuck, that's when I started getting interested. Then they expanded Nacho's character, who, by the way, I thought Voss was the best Far Cry villain. I'm glad Michael Mando got a chance to shine on Saul. He did great. I almost overlooked him talking about the finale because we didn't see him in the finale. He had his own finale earlier in the season, in season 6. But yeah, expanding his story was really smart. We got a lot of insight into Mike's character, who is like 70 playing 50, which is why they should do a Mike prequel where he's supposed to be 30, but they just have the 70-something-year-old Jonathan Banks play him and don't even address it, and barely put makeup on him. But the real thing is, though, for me, I really liked that they showed who he was before. We saw his progression from, here's a guy who wants to start over, to one decision leading to another decision, like dominoes, and then he eventually works for Gus, who is a very bad person who ends up hurting a lot of people. So, very interesting progression, really well written. Like I said, the character stuff in Saul was a little bit more subtle. Breaking Bad's first episode, they're in the RV, they're making meth, Walter White's in his tighty whities, you know, they're escaping, and then this episode, it was like not really a whole lot going on. A couple things. There was skaters. There was malpractice, I guess, or sorry, a lawsuit. You know, so it took a while for Saul to really win me over. And then when we hit like season 2 and 3 of Saul, now I could go back and watch season 1 and be like, oh, I love this. But once I hit 2 and 3, I felt like, okay, now the show is really hitting its stride. Now we get to see these characters become their own characters a little bit. Jimmy's backstory, you know, the sunroof, I forget what was it, Chicago sunroof maybe? Ohio sunroof, is it the Long Island sunroof? I'm not sure, but he takes a dump, and that is something, that's the chicanery that he has to go through to become Slippin' Jimmy, and then Chuck just does not believe in him, and that kind of thing really unfolds. And the question is, that I think really the show in its entirety kind of asks in a way, is can people change? Chuck didn't think Jimmy could change. But maybe if they spent more time together, that could have been a little different. Jimmy did change into Saul, which was a way worse form, and then he had to change again into just this pathetic Cinnabon dude. And then at the end, he changes back into Jimmy, and he proves Chuck wrong, and he does change and actually does something good. Can people change? Well, Nacho changes. And I think that's... Kim changes too, in many ways. So yeah, I mean, people can change. It takes time. It takes effort. Sometimes it takes trauma. And that's what we see in Better Call Saul. The show manages to stay fun. It manages to be... I think it shows an interesting side of law. Whereas I don't want to watch a law TV show. I don't want to watch Night Court. This is just modern Night Court. No, it really turns into its own kind of view on these things, mixed with the cartel underworld. And poor Nacho gets wrapped up in all this. And then they, you know, we get Lalo, who is just a little unrealistic when he comes down from the ceiling, but I loved that character so much. I thought he was very effective and very, very charming. And that's what makes him so scary. So all of the, and even Howard, whose role was expanded. I was in season 5, I was like, oh, they didn't really have a whole lot for Howard. And then he becomes a central focus of 6. I think it was genius that those two sides of the story meshed. Again, the whole time we're getting little bits of Breaking Bad. Your knowledge of Breaking Bad enriches your Saul experience and vice versa. They help each other. And now I will never see that Super Lab in the same way ever again. So, my theory is that in, 10 years' time, people will be looking back on these two shows as being like almost perfect TV shows. I'm trying not to blow too much smoke up their ass and be hyperbolic, but I really haven't enjoyed a TV show this much in a long time. My favorite TV show is Star Trek: The Next Generation, and that had a garbage first season and a pretty bad second season with some good episodes. This run that Vince Gilligan has had, and I love the X-Files, but even the X-Files had some bad episodes, like especially towards the end when Mulder leaves. But this run between Breaking Bad and Saul, there may be a couple somewhat boring episodes, and I know some people didn't love the Gene episode where they pulled the scam, because it's like, oh, we only got 4 episodes left. The truth is, though, I don't think there was a bad episode, and I don't think there was anything that happened outright that made the show jump any kind of shark, and that's rare. That's really, really rare. I mean, I think The Sopranos is one of the best shows. I just watched that last year, mostly for the first time. I'd seen a lot of it when I was younger. But with an adult brain, I love The Sopranos. But this, I think, between these two shows, is better. That's my personal opinion. And I also feel like I know that these shows together are better than Next Gen, but Next Gen is just kind of a comfort food. Like you're on the Enterprise, it's cool, they solve puzzles, and things happen. It's like a video game, and then the solution happens at the end of the episodes. But I love those characters so much, even if the premise is completely different. So I wouldn't probably put it above Next Gen because that's just a personal favorite. But I'm gonna say that Saul and Breaking Bad, both apart and together, didn't really have bad episodes and always remained consistently interesting and built towards a greater thing. And I love the storytelling method of like, well, we don't know 100% what's going to happen. Like, hey, Aaron Paul was supposed to die at the end of the first season of Breaking Bad. Howard wasn't supposed to be a main character. Maybe even Ray Seahorn, Kim. So the fact that they are able to like work as they go along, see where the story goes, maybe have a plan, but then figure out the details and work in a way that, continues to make sense to the story and also kind of build up characters that end up becoming interesting. That, I think, is why the show remained consistently good. And I feel like these writers just kind of wanted to tell a good story and not make it cool, like Walking Dead, like super cool. So I don't know. I really thought that these were great shows. I'd recommend them to pretty much anyone. And Saul definitely ended up being a worthy prequel slash sequel slash at the same time quel as Breaking Bad. And I'm glad it stuck the landing. I'm sure everyone on that show is very emotional that they are, they're done. And I would be too, because it seems like they loved each other. They really had a great time working with each other. All the interviews show that they really kind of got close. And Next Gen had a similar thing, by the way. Even David Duchovny and Gillian Anderson in X-Files. I feel like some of the magic of some of these shows is when the cast ends up hanging out and really gelling and connecting with each other as people. And that shows on screen. And some of my favorite shows have that chemistry. So I'm sure the actors are sad, but I'm glad it happened. I look forward to whatever Vince and Peter Gould do next. And just remember, everybody, we will have infinite memes. That's really what was happening during the airing of Breaking Bad and Saul, but now we don't have any new content, so it's just gonna be memes. It's gonna be, Walter, put your dick away. We're gonna have that. We're gonna have Kid Named Finger. Lots of Mike memes. It's funny because these shows are, even though they're funny, they're pretty serious shows and a lot of dark shit happens, and yet they have the most amazing memes. And like, the Walter White face from Ozymandias shows up everywhere. Guaranteed we're gonna get final episode memes. So the future of every Breaking Bad and Saul, specifically Saul at the moment, community is just going to be sick memes until the end of time. So look forward to that. I guess I'll list a couple of my other favorite shows, but Game of Thrones season 1 to 4 I thought was as good as some of the best TV I've ever seen. We know what happened after that, which is why it's even more impressive that this show ended so well. Deep Space Nine, Star Trek Deep Space Nine, definitely one of my favorites. Nathan for You. Okay, well maybe we should talk about just dramas. I thought Severance had a really good season. I just watched that, but also wasn't my favorite, but it was good. Good for recent. The Boys has definitely hit a level of memory and quality that people are talking about it a lot, and I like it a lot. It's not perfect, but, excuse me, it's very good. See, this is what's happening right now. These are only the recent shows that are coming to mind. So I would need to probably... I'm forgetting some of my favorites for sure. When I type best TV shows of all time in Google, Game of Thrones is the first result. The fuck? Stranger Things Season 4 was fun. I wouldn't put it on the same level as Saul at all, or anything like that, but it was fun. So it's gonna be hard to match this level of quality. And I'm gonna miss this, because it really ended up becoming like almost the standard of how to write a drama. And it was just so good that now I'm gonna have a hard time finding a show that I like as much. But, you know, obviously I like Curb Your Enthusiasm and stuff like that. But this was its own thing, and I'm glad it happened. It will be missed, the Breaking Bad universe. Maybe one day we'll see something. Also, you know, maybe we can call Saul. I don't know. Call him, he's crying. Well, there's a good chance I'm going to think of several more things to talk about after I end this. So maybe, if I need to, I'll add one or two things into it. But if not, thank you for listening. And thank you for watching my stuff as always. I'm glad people want to hear my thoughts on stuff like this. I'm no expert. I edit videos, I filmed stuff a little bit, but I don't make TV. So this is just my analysis as someone who likes to watch this stuff. I don't really have any expertise, but I hope you enjoyed listening and maybe even discovered a thing or two. But thanks, Vince. Thanks, Peter Gould. And thanks, everybody involved with these shows, whether it be Cranston, Odenkirk, you know, Aaron Paul, and Ray Seahorn. and everyone else that made it happen, including the networks that they... The fact that they even took a chance on Breaking Bad, apparently, according to the story, is amazing. So, be not sad that it's over. Be glad that it happened. And now I will go. Thank you, everybody. Take care. Until the next amazing show comes along. Better Call Saul.